Hello and welcome to Financial Education for the Nation. My name is Warren Shute and I'm here today on this very autumnal day, beginning of September, on my own. And the reason I'm on my own is I want to talk to you about something that's very close to my heart, is investing for children. So putting money away for your children, for the future, and what you can do and how it all works, that kind of thing. So, as I always say, with everything, whether it's investing for your children, investing for yourself, whatever, you've got to know your outcome. You've got to know what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing what you're doing, that kind of thing. So what is our intention behind this? And when you're putting some money away for your children, quite often we'll just put the money into a bank account or put some money aside, that kind of thing, and have no real purpose or intention behind it. And although I believe just putting money aside is better than not put money aside, I think if you have some intention behind it, you can do even better. You can have a better outcome for both yourself and your children. So with regards to that, have a think about what is it I'd be saving for. So for some of you, you might think, actually, I'm going to put some money aside because it's nice to be able to help them out with their driving lessons when they turn of age. It might be nice to be able to help them out with some university costs if they decide to go on to higher or further education. Or it might be nice to help them out with, for example, a house deposit if they decide to buy a house at a later date. Whatever your sort of purpose is behind that, have some kind of intention behind it. And the reason for that is you're going to have a time frame. Because when we invest, time is your friend. And we want to know what we're doing, and we can choose the most appropriate investment based on how long it is we've got into the future, what it is we want to invest into. So if, for example, you have recently had a child, you might then say, well, okay, we've got about 16, 17, maybe 20 years before I'm going to need access to some of this money. If it's for a house purchase, it potentially could be 30 years. And you've really got a lot of time on your side, which is great. Ollie and Bella, so my son Ollie's 14, my daughter Isabella's 12, so they're obviously at school now, so their university days are really coming up fast, which sort of scares the life out of me. But obviously we've got costs involved with doing things then, and then potentially around about age 30 they might look to buy a house. So for Ollie, what have I got, 16 years or so on that, or 18 years for Isabella. So they're sort of time frames that I would work towards in respect of saying, okay, how much can I afford to put aside? Where's the best place to put the money? And how should I invest the money as well? So having an outcome, so knowing what it is you want and when you want to achieve it, is very, very important. And then secondly, moving on from that, understanding how much time have I got to allow myself to invest in. When we're investing in the stock market, and principally for most of you, that'd be the best place to hold your money. We say 5 years or less is really too short a time to actually get exposure to the stock market, and we should hold the money on deposit. So for example, Ollie being 14, if I wanted to put money away for him to go into university, sort of like, 19, 20 years old, 18, 19 years old, that's too short a time really for me to invest in the stock market. So using some kind of cash-based investment, either a very short-term bond fund or a deposit account or premium bonds, would be a more appropriate place to hold that. And the reason for that is when you invest in the stock market goes up and down over time, depending on how much risk you expose yourself in the stock market. And when the stock market goes down, you need to be able to stay tight and allow it to ride itself out. Otherwise, you're going to sell and then cash it at a low. And for example, if we were having this conversation in November 2007, trying to save for our children's university or something, and they were going to go to university in, say, 2 or 3 years, we would then basically have sold pretty much at the bottom of the financial crisis when the markets were low, and we wouldn't be able to make a profit on it. We'd have actually made a loss. So it wouldn't have worked for us at all. And there are dozens and dozens of experiences in history which would tell us that. And that's why when you hear an investment professional say 5 years or more, that's really what they're saying. At Lexington, my own planning firm, we say 5 to 7 years or more, because we believe that sometimes, depending on the asset allocation, the mix, you could actually take up to 7 years to make sure that you're showing a profit. So when we talk about your outcome, it's not that I just want to keep bringing everything back to the money plan, but it's knowing, okay, what's my purpose behind it? Once I know what my purpose is, I've got a time frame to work towards, and I'm always conscious that I need a 5 to 7 year period. That's really a rolling period as well, because as I approach that date, if I'm going to crystallize or realize that money, so I'm going to take it from stocks and shares investments into cash, I don't just want to leave it to a specific date. I want to maybe do it over a period of time as I approach that date. So let's use some round figures. Let's say, for example, I've been invested for a number of years, and my son Ollie's 14, and I want the money out when he's 20 for whatever reason, doesn't really matter why. He's 14 now, so at 15, if I'm fully invested in the stock market, I might then start thinking, well, let's de-risk. Let's start going from 100% stock market down to maybe 80 or 60% stock market. So I hold the rest in cash or lower risk investments. And as time goes on again, so maybe 3 years out, maybe I'm actually de-risking even further. So maybe only 20% stock market for the last couple of years before I go into cash at the end. It would be risky. I was going to say it was silly, but I don't want to sort of use terms like that. It would be risky if I left everything until the last minute, been fully invested in the stock market, and then the day before I needed it, the market's tanked. Something goes with the economy, whatever it might be, the market's tanked, and then I've got, say, 10, 15, 20% less in my pot because I left it to the last date. What I'm really doing is de-risking my investment as I approach the date of need or requirement, and therefore I'm giving myself a bit more certainty. So step one is, what am I saving for? What's my outcome? How long have I got before I need access to that money? And then we start looking at, okay, what kind of risk am I comfortable with? How much risk do I want to expose myself to? Now, when we talk about investing, we typically talk about stock market investing, and we typically talk about buying a fund as opposed to buying individual shares. So I've covered this before, but just for completeness, let me make sure I go through it. We're investing for our children. We can do one of three things. We can buy individual shares for them, and there's a place for that, I believe. We can buy an active managed fund. I struggle with the place of that, I'm afraid. Or we can buy an index passive fund. Now, depending on what it is you want to achieve will depend on the strategy you want. And let me explain that a little bit more. I buy individual shares typically once a year on their birthday for Ollie and Isabella. And the reason I do that is because I believe it will engage them and interest them in investing. If I told them that we're buying this index fund, and showed them Lexo, which is the site that I use to do it, and we go on there and I show them the portfolio, it's not really engaging. They can't quite relate to it. Saving and investing is possibly quite boring for them anyway at that age. What they really want is have fun and spend the money and buy things. So if I can relate to them about saving and investing a little bit more, then there's a story behind it as it engages them. Okay, so going back to step one, what's your outcome? Is your outcome just to ensure that there's some money there when you need it? Or is your outcome to try and educate them and bring them along on a journey so that possibly both of you learn together and you have a more informed child turning into an adult? Or what's your purpose behind this? So my purpose behind buying a share with Ollie and Bella each year is not the best investment strategy in the world. I'm completely open to that, and I agree. I'm quite open and honest about that. However, it does make it interesting for them. So they have a very simplistic, very basic portfolio at the moment, and these are shares that they have bought over the years. In some examples, I'm trying to have a little think. Isabella's got Facebook, Disney. I think they've both got Amazon. I think Ollie's got Netflix, Microsoft. They're pretty tech heavy, but the reason they're tech heavy is not because we think they're great investments, but I've said to them, what do you think is a good company? Well, I've gone back further than that. I've said, how do you think companies make money, and which companies make more money than others? What would you rather have, a successful company or a failing company? And which companies do you think are more successful? And they've obviously come up with names that they've chosen. Now, I can link that to a reality and a story for them, and I can say to them, my Netflix subscription, for example, has just gone up, but I can say to them, we have made more money out of our Netflix shares than we've paid in subscriptions. So we've become an owner rather than a consumer. So just trying to teach them about this a little bit. I can also say that about Amazon. I can't say that about my Tesla shares, I must confess. But that's good. It's good to be honest and open that not every investment will be a success story for them because they have to learn. But it's nice for them to get the lesson of, oh, okay, by being an owner, I now own part of that company. I participate in the profits of that company. So I'm a little bit more interested on what that company does. And therefore, I'm now learning and becoming a bit more engaged in the investment story. Now, I use that as a bit of a bait, a carrot to encourage them to understand and learn more. As they progress in age, when they maybe get into their 16s and towards 18 or something, I'll then change the story more towards index investing in what we would term as evidence-based investing, to say that, hey, we might have done okay with those shares, but you remember some of them didn't do so well. When we're investing serious money, we couldn't necessarily afford to take that risk. Because as we get adults, as we become adults, we get busy with our day-to-day work, and we hopefully will have more and more money. And buying individual shares, if we buy, say, 5 and 2 of them don't do very well, that's a big chunk of our savings caught up in 2 shares. So we really need to diversify it. So we would then encourage them to diversify away from individual stocks, okay, and then into collective funds. And this goes back to, I said, there's 3 ways they can invest. The first way was buying individual stocks. And the second way would be active funds. Now, an active fund is where you buy a fund and you pay a fund manager to outperform the market. Now, I want to really make sure we stay on investing for children on this podcast or this video. So I won't go into the ins and outs of why I don't feel it's a good idea. But typically, just big picture, broadly speaking, the additional costs that are layered in active fund management and the additional risk that is levied because you've got an individual timing the market, buying and selling, putting their emotional layer in between you and the market, generally speaking, over time, doesn't outperform the market. And this has been evidenced by quite a few academic papers. I do appreciate there are some advisors out there, some advisors who may even be watching this podcast, who are very strong believers in active management. And that's fine. I respect people's opinion. I'm not evangelical. I respect people's opinion. If that's what they want, that's absolutely fine. But for me and my 24, 25 years almost financial planning experience, I would say to you that you really want to stay away from active management and stick with index funds or passive management. And that's why I offer to people via my website called Lexo, lexo.co.uk. There's a selection of 10 portfolios on that site of index funds, passive funds. And that's the third way of investing. So I remember I said the first way was buying your own individual shares. And although that's not a perfect investment solution, it has its purposes because it encourages you and it engages you. And I actually have some clients who allow us to manage maybe 80 or 90% of their money, the core of their money, but they'll have a satellite approach. So they'll have some individual shares and things on the outside because it's fun, it's enjoyable, and there's no argument against that. That was the first one. The second one is active management, which I'm not really a fan of in any way, shape or form. And then the third one is the index way or the passive investments. And that's when you buy a fund that covers the whole of the market, hopefully the world market, not just the UK. And then you just sit tight and you hold on to that. So if you're investing for education and engagement, trying to engage your children into this, then the individual shares approach could be a good way for you to go. If you are saying, well, actually, I don't want that risk, I don't have that level of money to do it, I just want to make sure I can put something away, I don't really have the time, or perhaps your relationship is more distant, maybe you're a grandparent trying to invest for a grandchild, then an indexed fund would be the most perfect way to go. And what we then need to do is establish the level of risk that you want to take with that money. Now, the more risk you accept, the greater your long-term, remember I said long-term, expected return will be. And what I mean by that is if you invested 100% in the stock market, you could expect a greater or a higher long-term return than if you only invested 10% in the stock market. And the balance of the money would either be in short-term bonds or cash. Now, what's the trade-off here? So I'm investing more in the stock market, I'm getting a greater return. Why doesn't everyone do that? The reason they don't is because the retracement, the downward trend, is greater. So the portfolio will retrace or pull back at a greater level. So if you invested 100% in the stock market, you might expect a higher return, but your retracement will be far, far greater than if you only invested 10% in the stock market, when you get a lower expected return. And as a rule of thumb, 100% stock market exposure, you could expect a 50% retracement in the investment history, investment journey. So if we look back at the 2000 dot-com bubble, which most of us can remember, I certainly can. And if you look back at the financial crisis, 2007, 2008, we experienced in the UK about a 47%, I think, retracement in the markets then. So if you were invested at the beginning, if you just got at the top, we didn't know what was going on, we just put our money in the top, we invested £100, that £100 actually fell to about £50, like £55, say, something like that. Now that is a huge retracement. I don't try not to call it a fall or a loss, because typically that will recover, okay? But that is a huge retracement. And you only experience the recovery if you stayed put, if you remained invested. And that goes back to the first one, is what's your outcome? What's your time frame? Because if we experience this retracement weeks or months or maybe even a year before we need the money out, that's going to be too close and possibly unnerve us. So we want to protect our losses, we sell. And we're all human beings. I always say, I have an expression, with physical beings run by our emotions. And it's true. Our emotions are affected by that. And one of the ways our emotions are affected by that is because we get all this influence from the financial propaganda around us saying it's different this time. You know, things are different this time. And I can remember quite clearly in the dot-com bubble, it's different this time because it's affecting our IT system. It's different this time in 2007 because it's our banking system. Now, that was a scary moment, even for a professional planner like myself. There were some things going on there that was really worrying, but we come out the other side. And we only enjoyed, participated in those gains on the other side if we remained invested. And that's why I say you've got to really understand your time frame and the level of risk that you're willing to take. And the less time, less risk. More time, potentially more risk you can accept, because you can ride out those ups and downs. Then the third thing that we consider when we come to investing is the account, or the wrapper. Now, for children, you've got the junior ISA. So the junior ISA was set up specifically to encourage parents, grandparents to invest for their children, so that there is money there for their future. The allowance is £4,368. Okay, so it's I think a huge amount of money that you can invest tax-free in the stock market. It's called a JISA, a junior ISA, junior individual savings account. And that's a fantastic place for you to use and to encourage both yourself, and then possibly if grandparents or uncles or aunts or godparents want to give the children some money at their birthday or Christmas, why don't you just ask them to transfer the money into the account, or give you cash and then you pay it into the account. So you keep drip feeding this account with just levels of money. In addition to that, so the junior ISA is available up to 18 years old. In addition to that, at age 16, your children, they're still children at 16, can open up a cash ISA. So for that quirky period of time there, between 16 and 18, they can have both a junior ISA and a cash ISA. So they've got two that they can run there together. They can't have a stocks and shares ISA, which is an investment ISA that us adults, as it were, would be aware of, until they're 18. So the rules are slightly different. So you've got a junior ISA for a newborn baby all the way up until 18. And then you've got a cash ISA from age 16 onwards. And then you've got a stocks and shares ISA from age 18 onwards. So there's that period of time between age 16 and 18 that they can have both a junior ISA and a cash ISA. And the junior ISA is like the successor from the child trust funds. So I think it's just Ollie, actually. Just Ollie of my children got a junior child trust fund, and they had a voucher that was paid into that. And if you've got children of that sort of age, so that would be, say, 13, 14, 15, 16, I think it's about that sort of age, they would have this, because I think every child was given one of these. So maybe rummage around in your paperwork and see where it is. And those child trust funds can now be transferred or switched into junior ISAs. And the only real advantage is, generally speaking, junior ISAs are the way forward. That's what all the technology and all the information and all the research been put into. So you can get more funds and more information on those. So there's a lot more accessibility. And on Lexo, we offer the junior ISAs. We don't advertise it because we have a minimum investment amount of £20,000. And the junior ISA is obviously at 4. But if you invested other money, then we'd allow you to do a junior ISA on there as well. And the reason we have an investment amount of £20,000, because some people say it's very high, is because we want you to do investment. We don't want you to save in the stock market. We need you to make sure that you've got your emergency reserve and everything else sorted out first, and then you look at that as doing a serious investment. So you maybe save up that amount of money first, and then you can go off and do it. Also, it's expensive for us to run, so there has to be a minimum for us to have it on the platform. So they're your wrappers. And the other consideration too for a wrapper on account would be a pension. Now, you can set up a pension for a newborn baby. Now, this, I believe, is a wonderful gift. If you think about it, quite often we will buy things for children and babies and things, and once the necessities are done, everything else gets sort of lost and forgotten 6 months later, not a year later. Whereas by funding a pension, and this is something a lot of grandparents decide to do, by funding a pension for a child, whether it's a newborn baby or just a child, at whatever level you can afford, will make a difference for them when they come to retire, because they won't be able to touch it. They're a child. They won't be able to touch it till 57, 58. It's 10 years below the state retirement age. So in the moment we're at 65, so the pension age is 55. But as we get older, that's going out. I think my state pension age is 67. So it'll be 57, I can access a personal pension. And then it'll be 58 for younger children. But that's good, because that means it's locked away. So whether they're going through a tough time in their teens or in their 30s, they're setting up house and that sort of stuff. As they go into their 40s, they start putting money away themselves. They will then be able to piggyback on the back of what grandparents, uncles, aunts, maybe mum and dad have been able to do for them, and put money aside. Now, I often talk reasonably big figures, but I wanted to sort of shrink it down a little bit and said, if you invested, say, £20 a month, so I'm looking down because my paperwork's on here. If you invested £20 a month, so basically almost like £5 a week over a 10-year period, and you got a 6% return, then you'd be looking at around about just shy of £4,000 fund after a 10-year period. Now, £20 a month for some people will be a phenomenal amount of money, and it would be unaffordable. But for some of you listening, that would be a comfortable amount you could set aside. What expenses might you have in 10 years' time for your children, particularly, that would help? So you could potentially open up a junior ISA, invest the £20 a month into that, and then you'd have roughly £3,700, £4,000 in, say, 10 years' time, assuming a 6% return. I don't think a 6% return is too unrealistic. I'll show you some figures in a second. If you can do that for a longer period of time, if you can do that for a 20-year period, so let's say, for example, they're quite young now, your children, maybe they're even a newborn, and you saved up until their 21st birthday, you would have you'd have just over £12,000 saved up. So just from a £20 a month payment, £5 a week, £12,000. Now, that's going to go a long way towards helping them through university, or maybe as a deposit on a house. If we think that university is going to cost us roughly £30,000 in tuition fees, and then possibly on top of that another £20,000 or so, having £12,000 available to help you out there is going to make a big difference. And then if you're able to do the same amount of money and invest it for 30 years, okay, so another 10 years on top of that, you're looking at that £20 a month is converted into just shy of £27,000. So a huge sum of money. Now, these figures, okay, are not guaranteed. They're assuming a 6% growth rate, and they're also assuming you keep that monthly payment in line with inflation. So I've used 3.5%. So these things need to be taken into consideration, and you need to keep checking in on your investments. So how are they doing? The reason I quote you the figures is not to you to have a target, but to have some idea of saying, well, actually, if I just put £20 a month away, which isn't unaffordable for you, you can do that. In 10 years, you could have just shy of 4,000. In 20 years, maybe just over 12,000. Or in 30 years, 26,000. It makes some kind of target or some kind of something to focus on, but you must keep these things under review. It's very, very important. This whole set and forget mentality won't work. You must keep an eye on it, make sure it's performing okay, make sure you're in the right portfolio, make sure you're still maintaining the right level of risk. And I think by doing this once a year is plenty. You don't need to worry and fret over it all the time. I tend to do mine literally the first week back in the new year. And I go through the whole money plan, 5 steps, and just make sure I give myself a financial planning review so that I'm ready for the forthcoming year. So that, in a nutshell, is my sort of tips and advice with regards to saving and investing for your children. So the first thing is really, what's your outcome? What are you saving for? What is the date? What is the purpose? Is it to help them with university? Is it help them for a car purchase? Is it help them for a house purchase? Whatever it might be. So we have from doing that, we have some kind of estimate of time frame. How much risk can we take with the money will depend on how much time we've got and also our own personalities. So for a younger child, we should be taking more risk because we expect it to be invested for a lot longer. If our children are close to university times, then perhaps they're so close that we don't invest at all. We just use bank deposits. Remember, there's a 5 to 7 year window, and that's a rolling 5 to 7 years that we need to be very cautious and aware of, that we start de-risking or not invest at all if we're in that window. Okay, and then the third thing to look at is the account or the wrapper that we use. And primarily speaking, a junior ISA is available, which you can do £4,368, which is probably more than most of you want to put away. That's a phenomenal, that's 360 odd quid a month. There's a cash ISA once they reach 16. So if you're thinking of university, maybe a cash ISA is an option to consider. And then you've got that window there between 16 and 18 where they can actually have both. And then from 18 onwards, they can have the stocks and shares ISA. And then finally, you've got the pension. Now, the pension is a fantastic option, but it's not going to help them with things like university. It's not going to help them with a car purchase, or it's not going to help them with a house deposit, because the pension can be set up and it's only accessible once they reach, let's say, 57, 58 years old, because it's 10 years behind the state retirement, what their state retirement age is. So that's investing for children. I did say I was going to share some portfolios, so you can see. Let me just bring it up on screen. So if you're listening, unfortunately, I won't see this, but you can go to lexo.co.uk/our-portfolios. And on the screen now, what you can see, starting at the bottom, is Lexo 10, and then going up to Lexo 100. Lexo 10 basically means we've got 10% of the money invested in the stock market. And then at Lexo 100, we have 100% of the money invested in the stock market. And if we go across to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth column along, where it says the last 20 years, okay, so we're given a lot of data there. You can see at the bottom, we've got an average return of just shy of 4.8%. And then as you progressively go up the scale, at the 20 years, you've just got shy of 8%, 7.7, yeah. And then to the right of that, you can see the standard deviation. Now, standard deviation is a long word for saying how much does it go up and down. Now, it's not a great measure of risk because it could be going up and down on an upward trend. So it's going up and down, you don't mind because it's still growing over time, or it could be going up and down on a downward trend. But what it does show is it shows volatility. volatility is a measure. It's not the only measure, but it's a measure of risk. And some people link it quite closely to risk because they really relate it to a bank account. So a bank account would have no standard deviation, it would just be a straight line. Whereas you can see the Lexo 10 is only 3. It's quite modest. Whereas Lexo 100 is over 3 times that. It's nearly 11, so 10.89. Okay, so I bring them up primarily to sort of show you that the longer term returns, say 6%, are reasonable, but you do need to take stock market risk for that. And Lexo is not just the only site that you can use. Go and Google. My outcome here isn't to encourage you to go and use that site. My outcome is to educate you to take decisions, take action to make decisions. So, but that's there if you need it. Now, this was done as a result of a couple of viewers' questions. They've sort of said, give us some feedback on children and give us some feedback on investing. I read, in the moment, I'm able to read all of your emails. That maybe not last forever. They are coming through thick and fast. So I'm getting lots and lots more comments on both social media and YouTube. And I get emails into warren@warrenshute.com. Please continue to do that. But for as long as I can, I will read them. I try and dedicate at least 1, sometimes 2 days a week to doing this, and I absolutely love it. It's great. What would you like me to hear? What would you like to hear from me? What would you like me to say? What would you like me to comment on? I am hoping to start doing some interviews online, so where you can call in and tell me your situation. You can get some advice, ask for opinions and things from me, and I'll feed back to you live what you should do and how I would advise you if you were sat in front of me as one of my financial planning clients. Now, if you want to do that confidentially, that's no problem at all. Change your name. We can just put my screen up so we don't see you. You can just talk. If you're happy to share your details and stuff, even better. The outcome for me for doing this is people will learn from your message, your lessons. So if I can share your message, there'll be hundreds of other people with a similar situation, and you're not just helping yourself, you're helping others. And that's my outcome behind the money plan and financial education foundation. It's really to help people make better money decisions. So enough said to say, thank you so much for listening. It's been enjoyable to listen to you, to talk to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it today. And that was Investing for Children. Until next time, take care and be careful. Bye-bye.